Jacqueline Pitts, and I'm the author of The Children of WASAFA, A Message to Gangbangers. In the book, I created 3 rival street gangs in Rockaway, Queens, New York. As the story unfolds, an African symbol reveals that key members in each gang, along with an activist from Brazil, are connected. I wrote The Children of WASAFA to illustrate through storytelling that people of African descent in the United States could easily be related to others of African descent they do not know. Because of that, I want gangbangers to realize members in rival street gangs could be their relatives. Why? Because of the largest forced migration in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. In Africa now, as it was then, there were thousands of ethnic groups, but only 36, and I use the word only for illustration purposes and not to make light. There were only 36 ethnic groups that supplied the transatlantic slave trade. Some of the ethnic groups were different from each other, and some were closely related. People from the 36 ethnic groups were captured and enslaved weekly, year after year, generation after generation, for centuries. This is when the separation of African families began for those who supplied the Atlantic trade. I'd like to give an example. Let us say on one sunny day, you and your 2 brothers left your village to hunt. But unfortunately, you and your brothers became the hunted and were captured. 2 months later, your aunt was captured. 5 years later, your father was captured. 20 years later, your sister's granddaughter was captured. And all of you brought to a different place in the Atlantic New World. Or if you were brought to the same place, but in different generations, family would not know family. Africans were brought to North, South, Central America, or the Caribbean. That is why people of African descent in the United States have relatives they don't know here, of course in Africa, but also in other countries. Another example of separations, but on this side of the Atlantic. In the United States, a mother or father who was sold eventually created new families where they went. And the person left behind or sold also, but to a different owner, did the same thing. The former family never met again, and the new family would not meet. At some point in the future, the descendants of those separated might encounter each other, but they would not normally know they were family. Additionally, during slavery, it was not uncommon for children to be sold away from their parents, and brothers and sisters sold away from each other. Sibling separations created a situation where the children of brothers and sisters would not know their aunts, uncles, or first cousins. These separations went on for centuries. Again, family would not know family. History records there were 12.5 million African people who were captured. About 2 million died during the Middle Passage from illness, suicide, or killed.
I know you're gonna dig this.
But they were all not brought to the U.S. Most went to Brazil and other countries. Only 450,000 came to what will become the United States. By the time slavery ended in 1867, 1864, the ethnic groups had mixed many times over and had produced 8 million African Americans. And now, according to the 2013 census, there are 45 million African descent people in the United States. We do not know the percentages of African enslaved families that were separated. Most of the researchers whose works I've read use words like sustained separation or separations were not uncommon. Since slavery lasted for 366 years, which is about 18 generations, I imagine there were families in some generations or a substantial number of years in a given generation that stayed together. But it could not have held true for most because of the reasons slaves were sold or separated, which were, they were inherited by family members when slave owners died. They were sold to pay debts as a punishment, to accumulate cash for investments or to make purchases. Slaves were sold for any reason the owner wanted to sell them. When I talk about slave family separations, I use the words common and likely, because in every generation a slave owner is going to die, and it is like she had more than one heir to whom slaves were distributed. Historical letters written by slave owners discuss selling apart families. Historical journals and diaries written by travelers in slave states wrote about witnessing auctions where parents pled to stay with their children, or their children to stay with them, or men and women begged to stay together. The slave narratives frequently mention separation. Books written by abolitionists talked about the evilness of slavery and the separation of slave families and how cruel that was. Biographies of and autobiographies by former slaves talk about families separated. Newspapers after slavery ended had ads placed by former slaves wanting to find their families. Slaves wrote songs about going to heaven and seeing family lost to them because of a sale. It seems family separations were a common part of the institution of slavery in the United States. Let's look at this picture. This is a young soul gone too soon. Imagine in this picture the boys are two brothers enslaved during the early 1800s. The next reading is about them. Gangbanger, your 5 times great-grandfather and the deceased 5 times great-grandfather were brothers. The brothers loved each other and were very close until their owners sold them apart during slavery. They were young boys at the time, and they cried because they knew they would never see each other again, and they didn't. But they grew up and made families of their own. It took a long time for their descendants to meet, a few generations in fact. But by the time they met, they didn't know they were family. Young man, you just killed your cousin. Stop the violence.